Hello, folks. Welcome. We're letting folks in from the waiting room now. We'll just give it a minute or two as you all pile in. Thank you for joining us on this Friday before a holiday weekend. Welcome to Esprit Decor, an administrative history of Southwestern National Monuments, 1923 to 1957, hosted by the National Park Service and the National Council on Public History. If you feel comfortable, please do drop your name in the chat and just let us know where you're joining us from. My name is Megan Hillman. I'm the program manager at NCPH, and I am based in Indianapolis, Indiana. This event has Zoom auto captions available. To access that, you'll hit Show Captions at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. If you don't see Show Captions, you can hit More with little three dots, and then the Show Captions option should be in there. Just as a reminder, by joining us today, you did agree to adhere to NCPH's event code of conduct. Please do adhere to that code of conduct through the event. Otherwise, we'll have to boot you. But I don't anticipate that happening, of course. To ask a question, you'll use the Zoom Q&A toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It just says Q&A, and there's a little box with a question mark. If you don't see that, or you'd rather just drop questions in the chat, you're also free to do that. So we are going to record the first part of this presentation, and then we're going to stop recording for the Q&A portion so that folks can ask whatever's on your mind, and no concern about that. And with those little details out of the way, I will pass things over to Linnea and Nathan Hallam for the presentation part of this. Take it away, Hallams.
Hello.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you, Megan. Well, hi, we're Hallam Historical Consulting. I'm Nathan Hallam. This is Linnea Hallam. We have had the pleasure of working on this administrative history of Southwestern National Monuments for probably about 4 years now. So it's been kind of a long journey. And I want to start by saying thank you to Stephanie and Megan and the rest of the NCPH crew, and Angela Cerna at NPS, all the folks at WAC in Tucson, and all the other archives and repositories we've been to. It's been a big help, and we thank you for that. So we start here with the Great Seal of Southwestern National Monuments, which was developed in the 1930s, but it's where we took our title for the admin history from. And so let's start with our first page. So Southwestern National Monuments, what was it? It was a few different things. First of all, it was an early NPS administrative unit that preceded the regional offices. It handled administrative tasks for national monuments in Arizona, New Mexico, southeastern Utah, and southwestern Colorado after 1923. And so what we're talking about when we talk about national monuments in the Southwest, these are, is it George Grant, NPS photographer? So George Grant took many photographs of Southwestern monuments. We're going to share a few here just to sort of give you a frame of reference and a visual for what we mean when we talk about these Southwestern national monuments. We got Casa Grande ruins on the left. These are all taken 1920s, 1930s. Montezuma Castle, a little north of Phoenix. Next is Tumacacori Mission, which is south of Tucson. Some Puebloan structures at Canyon de Chelly in northeastern Arizona. A couple more. Oops. On the left, that's Navajo National Monument in northern Arizona. That's Zeke Johnson at Natural Bridges in the middle, longtime custodian at Natural Bridges in Utah, and then Rainbow Bridge in southern Utah. Sort of now right near Lake Mead, Lake Powell, sorry. So what else was Southwestern National Monuments? It began with the promotion of Frank Pinkley, who was the custodian of Casa Grande National Monument, to the position of superintendent of Southwestern Monuments in the fall of 1923, with his headquarters at Casa Grande. And part of the logic of that promotion involved, we're quoting from the 1924 NPS annual report, It involved unifying the monument work and passing the problems from the various monuments up to a local man who would be in touch with the local conditions, thus relieving the already overcrowded Washington office of some work which could be better understood and more economically handled from a field headquarters. So it was really the first sort of middle management regional office, if you will, in the Park Service, about 15 years before the regional offices appeared in the agency. And so it was really a way to get this burden of administering these national monuments way out in very remote corners of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, and Colorado. Um, the Washington office had trouble administering them, so if they could get someone in Arizona to handle that work, to go make the regular inspections, to prompt the part-time custodians to send in their monthly and annual reports, that was the goal. So in 1923, Southwestern National Monuments administered 17 national monuments, and then by 1940, it administered 27. So the program grew. In 1928, Pinkley hired his first dedicated SWNM staff member, a clerk. So he was just sort of handling it all by himself with his wife Edna from their home and headquarters at Casa Grande in the late 1920s, and then especially through the 1930s, the office develops a staff. So by January 1940, there were 17 staff members, all based at the Casa Grande Ruins headquarters. And then lastly, in 1942, so after about 19, 20 years, Southwestern National Monuments became subsumed within the Region 3 office at Santa Fe during World War II. It then became reestablished in 1950 at Santa Fe and then moved to Gila Pueblo in Globe, Arizona, just a little east of the original headquarters at Casa Grande Ruins. And then it closed permanently 5 years later in 1957. A map that we developed that shows all the different national monuments in the 4 states that were administered at one time or another by Southwestern National Monuments. Some have become national parks. Others have sort of fallen away from the National Park Service entirely, like Papago Saguaro in Phoenix and Tempe is now Papago Park. But all in all, close to 30 national monuments sort of trace their own administrative histories back to Southwestern National Monuments in one way or another. So a couple goals of the admin history. One was to track the activities and the development of Southwestern National Monuments through monthly reports, annual reports, and correspondence found in RG 79, records of the National Park Service. We also found a few other sources of information that we'll talk about, but those were sort of at the outset, kind of the obvious sources of archival materials that we were going to work with. And then, whoops. And then second of all, to assemble biographical information about the many people involved in the history of Southwestern National Monuments. So we wanted it to be sort of about people,
People oriented.
people oriented as opposed to just policy. And we'll talk a bit about the biofiles later as we get closer to the end. So chapter 2, I think I'll turn it over to Linnea. I guess a way to think about chapter 2, we do have biofiles where we discuss the individual histories of all the people involved in SWNM, with exception of Frank Pinkley because he kind of gets his own chapter.
There's a lot of biographical material in chapter 2. So yes, chapter 2 introduces Frank Pinkley, so future superintendent of Southwestern National Monuments. It covers his first tenure as custodian of Casa Grande from 1901 to 1915, and then his return to the position in 1918 after the establishment of the National Park Service. The chapter also introduces his wife, Edna, who was a South Dakota school teacher. She met Frank Pinkley in Arizona in 1903 while she was temporarily assisting her father in teaching at the Blackwater Day School on the Gila River Indian Reservation. Frank and Edna married in 1906, and she moved to Casa Grande into his tent with him, which received several modifications over the years, and then became a house, incorporated into a house in 1910. And Edna basically served as co-custodian for many years at Casa Grande. Early on, Frank Pinkley showed an interest in more than just a custodianship of Casa Grande. He, as early as 1906, was sharing his interest with the Washington office, the General Land Office at the time, and his interest in overseeing the protection and preservation of groups of archaeological ruins in Arizona. His interest was not well received. He also wanted to establish a government museum at Casa Grande for better interpretation for visitors. That too was routinely denied. So around 1910, Pinkley begins to focus more on his businesses, which were trading posts in the area, which his parents co-operated. And then in 1914, he moved over to politics and won a seat in the Arizona legislature for Pinal County, which is where Casa Grande was located. And during that time, Edna actually took over officially as custodian. She was paid for a year and became the custodian of Casa Grande while he was doing politics. But by 1915, they were done. They both resigned the custodianship and left. They returned to the position in 1918 after the interim custodian was caught selling some of the artifacts. And so Albright and Mather asked Pinkley if he will return. Pinkley had lost re-election in the Arizona legislature, and so he and Edna moved back. At this point, he becomes enthusiastic about working with the National Park Service, but learns quickly that it's still under General Land Office management, and the General Land Office is still not giving any money. So Albright suggests that they just request its redesignation as a national monument, which happens in 1918. And then formally at this point, Frank Pinkley is working directly with the National Park Service as custodian. Almost immediately, he starts taking on extra activities in the Southwest. He is asked by Mather and Albright to inspect other monuments, particularly Tumacacori mission, to look it over and submit a report on what it needed in terms of preservation and protection. And he does that. And during this time, Albright also makes him officially the custodian of Tumacacori, so he takes on a dual role. During the inspection of Tumacacori, some officials from the Washington office are with him, and they are very impressed and call him Washington's #1 man in the Southwest, exceedingly practical.
So he was the custodian of Casa Grande and then Tumacacori, and he was the only full-time NPS employee in the Southwest. Is that
For the monuments.
for the monuments? So he was in a good position to sort of as a full-time NPS person.
Some of the other monuments at this time had custodians, but they were very part-time. They're referred to as nominal custodians, earning $10 to $12 a year.
$1 a month.
$1 to just check on the monuments as they could.
They were like local ranchers who just happened to be neirby, and then were given the police power of a custodianship. But
Yes, though many of them gave a lot more time to it than they earned money-wise.
yeah. Oh, there's Edna.
There's Edna. This is the first government car given to the Pinkleys. It was a 1918 Model T Ford. Later becomes referred to as the Regulator and also the Baby.
They converted it into like a little RV. I like the
Later on.
NPS on the license plate there.
So chapter 3 basically focuses on a 4-year period where every single year the National Park Service gives Frank Pinkley more responsibility, leading up to the official designation of Southwestern National Monuments as a field office and Frank Pinkley as superintendent. So during this period, he maintains his status as custodian of Casa Grande and Tumacacori, but increasingly, especially during the summers, goes out on the road and makes inspections of any monument the Washington office asks him to go see. So it starts out with him being sent to Grand Canyon and Petrified Forest and Montezuma Castle in 1919. And at this point, Mather just casually refers to Pinkley as the general supervisor over Arizona monuments. At some point, Pinkley discovers that Mather might be considering him as superintendent of Grand Canyon when it switches over from being a national monument to a national park. Mather quickly writes to Pinkley and lets him know that no, that's not going to happen. Pinkley's most valuable role in the Southwest is archaeological. Pinkley, during his inspections, would also look around for who might make a good custodian at some of the monuments, notably selecting Martin Jackson at Montezuma Castle in 1923. And he would also just submit reports regularly for any monuments he inspected, showing what needed to be done, what they lacked in terms of resources and personnel, etc. So that's basically chapter 3. It leads up to, you can go to the next one here. Let's see.
I'll add that
Yeah.
Mather wasn't exactly interested in southwestern archaeological sites like Casa Grande or Montezuma Castle. So Pinkley, we found this correspondence in RG 79 of him sort of scolding Mather, saying, if you just come down here and see for yourself, you would get it. He was also becoming interested in preserving what he called the ruins that were really all over the Southwest. There was a number of sites. Not all of them became national monuments, but many of them did. So he's also sort of scolding the Washington office, saying things like, you've got to be responsible for conservation and preservation of these sites. There's looting. There's just deterioration from weather. So he's starting to, at this point, though he's not officially the custodian, and there is no Southwestern National Monuments quite yet, he's sort of playing the role of custodian in many ways and getting bolder with his correspondence with the Washington office. So a couple pictures. This is Montezuma Castle on the left. You can see Pinkley and Martin Jackson. It's not very safe what they're doing here, but they're sort of hanging, they're up on ladders and kind of like sort of suspended from ropes, doing their own preservation work on Montezuma Castle, what they called mudslinging.
Yeah, and so I should add right here too that during the inspections that Pinkley would make, he oftentimes would spend time at the various monuments and help out with repairs and just sometimes weeks at a time, like at Montezuma Castle in the summers.
Just on his own.
Yeah.
With no real money.
His family oftentimes traveled with him, as you see in the picture on the right. You can see Edna and their 2 children, Nancy Margaret and Addison.
And they converted their Model T into a kind of RV of sorts.
A home on wheels, home and office on wheels.
So to kind of summarize, this is Dale King, who became a naturalist with Southwestern National Monuments in the 1930s. He sort of wrote a little history in the 40s of SW&M, just sort of a little essay. But he writes that the late great Frank Pinkley started as a youth in 1901 as the caretaker of the Casa Grande ruins, then a reservation under the GLO. As other monuments were set aside in the Southwest, they were placed under his charge. He chugged around over the bad roads of those days in a Model T camp car, making inspections and reports, and using his microscopic allotted funds to hire local men to aid him sling mud and build braces in a never-ending fight against the forces of erosion, which threatened to destroy his beloved ruins and missions. So it was Pinkley, sort of on his own with the Washington office's support, acting as preservationist, conservationist, and providing a little police protection of Southwestern monuments in the early years.
So the 1923 is a significant year leading up to the establishment of Southwestern National Monuments. It begins really with a couple things. The excuse me here for a second. In 1923, in January of 1923, Pinkley suddenly has a little bit more time to respond to all the different requests from the Washington office when George Boundy and his wife Georgia show up from California in Arizona, deciding to settle there. They meet Pinkley at Casa Grande Ruins, and they have a rapport. Pinkley asks them to stay. They can camp out. They also have a modified vehicle, bungalow on wheels, they called it, that they rode around in an early RV. So they camped at Casa Grande and served as voluntary staff, allowing both Frank Pinkley and Edna to leave the monument and go on summer inspections, etc. And then you can talk a little bit about the budget with Crampton in the summer.
Sure. So, 1921, the Budget and Accounting Act, not very well remembered, but it was a big moment for SWNM and the National Park Service. What it did was it created the Bureau of the Budget. So this is when we start hearing about presidents sending their budgets to Congress. The Bureau of the Budget was an agency within the White House that was created to develop a annual budget for the entire government, with sort of coordinating that with the Treasury, which had a beat on how many tax revenues the government was taking in. So, what that meant for the Park Service and Southwestern National Monuments is that every cabinet level agency, like the Department of the Interior, received its own appropriations subcommittee. Uh, Prior to that, it was just a bunch of random members of Congress reviewing the Interior Department's different appropriation items, maybe not understanding anything about the Interior Department or the National Park Service, or certainly about Southwestern archaeological sites. After 1921, it got its own special appropriations subcommittee, chaired by Lewis Crampton of Michigan. That gave, the subcommittee was entirely dedicated to the Department of the Interior. So Crampton had time to sort of learn about everything that the Department of the Interior was involved in. Got around with the Reclamation Bureau, got a lot around with the Park Service, and then eventually made his way with Carl Hayden down to Arizona to inspect the Coolidge Dam site, but also stopped in at Casa Grande Ruins and met with Pinkley and saw for himself something that I'm not sure that Stephen Mather had yet done.
Mhm.
But Crampton, a member of Congress, saw for himself Casa Grande Ruins and he got it. And so he said, I'm going to make $5,000 available for the 1923, or excuse me, 1924 fiscal year for protecting these archaeological sites. So that was a big moment. It probably the National Park Service like, wow, more money, $5,000 out of nowhere. I think that was probably a big moment in terms of promoting Pinkley to custodian. And then a letter from Martin and Ada Jackson at Montezuma Castle was also persuasive, and they wanted Pinkley to be sort of like the dean of monument custodians, to spend more time going from one monument to the next, offering guidance. He had been at Casa Grande, he and Ed had been at Casa Grande for close to 20 years at this point. So they knew how to administer a archaeological monument, and they wanted Pinkley, Frank and Ed to be more available from a supervisorial standpoint. So Pinkley was formally promoted to superintendent in October 1923 at the Yellowstone Superintendent's Conference. It was a half-time appointment, and that's what SWNM was initially, was just a half-time appointment for Pinkley. He also remained the custodian at Casa Grande Ruins and Tumacacri.
Mhm.
So chapter 4, I know we could probably talk all day about this, but we're running up against 25 minutes. But chapter 4, establishing Southwestern National Monuments. So the early years of SWNM kind of look like the years that preceded it. It's pretty much just Pinkley with not a whole lot of money and his family making inspections of monuments. Um, he doesn't have hardly any money to do anything like hire staff or, build museums or build administrative buildings. But what he can do is get out his typewriter and write long form letters called circulars to all of his custodians and to the Washington office. So we have we found most of these. There may be a few that are still out there hidden somewhere, but we all that we could find we gathered and then we transcribed as a kind of like a documentary edition. And they sort of they you find them in at the National Archives in College Park. They sort of look like this. This is the Washington office's copy. They've sort of scrawled all over it like it says NM New Mexico miscellaneous. And they're but they get a sense of what Pinkley is instructing all of his part-time custodians. So this is really the best way to understand in the early years of SW&M what Southwestern National Monuments policy was. And they were just sort of Pinkley's ideas that he had developed over several years of administering Casa Grande ruins and Tumacacri. So it's kind of like just his advice, his guidance to the 15 to 20 part-time custodians that are out there. Well, Petrified Forest had a full-time custodian by then.
Yeah.
During the mid 1920s, you start to see every year a little bit more that Congress is providing SW&M, so some higher appropriations and funding for new staff positions. Fiscal year 1927, a new Casa Grande Ruins Ranger. That was not a SW&M hire; it was a Kager hire. But the Casa Grande Ruins Ranger position sort of became like the entry point to Southwestern National Monuments work. That was sort of like Pinkley would hire an individual into that ranger position at Kager and decide if if they had a future in Southwestern Monuments work.
They would get training, and then if an opening came up, any other monument, they would then have had their crash training at Casa Grande, and then they would move on and become staff somewhere else.
So Pinkley was able to then hire a clerk for fiscal year 1928. And then publicizing Southwestern National Monuments. Again, no money for this, so the Pinkleys, Frank and Edna, just sort of did this themselves. This is a little collage we made of all of Edna's published material. Top left, it's a one of a series of long feature articles in the Casa Grande newspaper, excuse me, where she's describing her summer inspection tour with Frank and the family. More of a formal publication about Southwestern National Monuments, published in Arizona Highways. In the middle left, she's meeting at the Florence Women's Club. Frank is doing this as well with Rotary clubs and Boy Scout troops and meeting with all sorts of different groups, meeting with legislators in Phoenix, just talking about ruins and the National Park Service and getting people to sort of understand what the national monuments are. And then Edna develops a published scientific book on Casa Grande ruins that I believe was intended for Stanford University Press, but was eventually picked up by the Arizona Archaeological and Historical Society. And you can still find copies floating around of this. So just sort of handling publicization of the ruins on their own without a whole lot of support from the Washington office. Chapter 5 is a sort of a brief time period, but an important series of incidents in 1927-28. Pinkley described some of his adversaries in and out of the agency as monument robbers. So Carlsbad Cave National Monument had tremendous support from the local Carlsbad, New Mexico community. They wanted it to be a national park because you got higher appropriations for a national park, so it'd be more money coming into the community. It was also, for anyone that's been to Carlsbad Caverns, it was remarkable in terms of scenery. And that was what the Washington office and specifically Stephen Mather considered the prerequisite for a national park is amazing scenery. And Carlsbad Caverns certainly has that. So it very quickly was able to get a lot of funding from private sources in southeastern New Mexico and western Texas, and that all that support from the public sort of prompted higher appropriations from Congress. They took it more seriously, and it quickly became a national park. Papago Saguaro National Monument was there was a lot of pressure from Phoenix and Tempe and Scottsdale to make this a public park. The Arizona State Fish and Game wanted it for like um, preserve for desert species that they
A zoo.
a zoo of sorts
Thinking.
of desert animal species that they moved off of state parks. They wanted it to be a zoo for um, Arizona fauna. Discussions of Petrified Forest as a national park. That was up in along I-40. Some of those communities were interested in Petrified Forest as a national park, again for the higher appropriations, so more money coming in. It was the largest of the monuments, and it needed roads, and road building was sort of a park activity more than a monument activity. There was some talk of El Morro in New Mexico as a state park. And then discussions of Bandelier National Monument, which was administered by the Agricultural Department through the Forest Service. The NPS was interested in that as a national park. Pinkley saw it as obviously a national monument because it's archaeological in nature. Hal Rothman, who sort of produced the first scholarship on Southwestern national monuments, had a journal article about Bandelier and the controversy over whether it should be a national monument in the Forest Service, a national monument in the Park Service, or a national park. And Pinkley wanted it to be a national monument within his Southwestern National Monuments organization, and he got it. And so through all this controversy comes some interesting policy discussions through letters, through these like long form letters, these circulars. We also have a controversy at Casa Grande Ruins, where the Southwest Museum, through an Antiquities Act permit, was able to conduct excavations. They found funerary objects, these oyas, these urns, and the Southwest Museum carried one of them back to the museum in Los Angeles, and the governor and the different cultural institutions in Arizona were furious. They thought it was looting and plundering, and so it forced. Really, it was Edna Pinkley who then responded, sort of reminding everyone about the language of the Antiquities Act that allowed reputable museums to carry away artifacts as long as it was deposited in a reputable museum or university. And so, from these controversies come more circulars. Again, that's all that Pinkley can really afford. But it's nice for the historians to sort of see what he was thinking, and you can see it set a lot of the early policies of how he, from Casa Grande, intended to administer these monuments. And then a gift from Congress. $35,000 for the 1929 fiscal year to hire full-time custodians. I wanted to share with you a type of record that we found regarding appropriations. After the 1921 Budget Act, NPS units, such as Southwestern Monuments, in addition to all the monuments included in the organization, sent in estimates. So they had a project, they want to build like an entrance road, or they want to develop a museum. They would put together a cost, submit the estimates to the agency in Washington. The Washington office would pass the estimates along to the Bureau of the Budget in the White House. They would make cuts, so everything would pencil out in terms of the amount of tax revenues coming in. And then they would produce the budget. And within the budget document, which is published every year, sort of like a government docs, and you can find it on Google Books or archive.org, we can see the budget each year. This is for the 1929 fiscal year, so this would have come out in the summer of 1927. For the Protection of National Monuments appropriation item, all the money that was going to be made available from Congress for national monuments, $30,000 to manage all 20 or so monuments. And so this is for an administrative history, this is kind of an important document. It gives you a sense of what the unit, in this case, Southwestern Monuments and all the different monuments within it, how they envisioned the development of their park, or in this case, collection of monuments. It's a reflection of the estimates that they submitted. And then those estimates then went to Congress, and there was a hearing, and there's transcripts of those hearings. And so you have the Washington office folks doing the best they can to justify Southwestern monument estimates, and it's the same for every park. They talk about what they're going to do with their $30,000, why they need it. Within the monuments appropriation, they were also taking care of places like Crater of the Moon in Idaho, Muir Woods in California. But you can see Mather down here on the first page in the middle paragraph on the second, on the lower half of the document, talking about Montezuma Castle. It needs a superintendent. We need a salary line for full-time custodian. And so there, he's drawing on annual reports from Pinkley and from Montezuma Castle to sort of justify the expenditure. And then you've got which is really great. I was really happy to find this. Every year you've got transcribed like some back and forth between Congress and the agency. And so in this year, and this happened three times, Crampton, who was the chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee, said at the top there, okay, you've got $30,000 for the protection of national monuments. And then about a third of the way down, he says, I noticed there's an increase over the previous year, but that is taken up by the items mentioned. If you had an additional $5,000, making $35,000, have you any idea what you would do with the money or what need there would be for it? And then Arthur Demaray, two lines down, jumps in and says, we need to hire more permanent custodians. So it's one of three occasions that we found where Crampton, as the subcommittee chair, as a congressman, was able to just sort of write in an extra amount to the budget. Despite what the Bureau of the Budget said the government could afford, he sort of like gifted a few $1,000s here and there for special projects. So he was a real friend of Southwestern Monuments. He was a real friend of the agency. Albright and Mather talked about him as being sort of like the third founder of the agency. He's been lost to history a little bit, so we made every effort to profile Lewis Crampton, the subcommittee chair from Michigan. So moving along, chapter 6. Finally, now Congress is investing a little bit more money in the monuments, and so the agency invests more of its resources into Southwestern Monuments, really for the first time. They send out Tom Vint, who's the chief landscape historian for the agency. His offices are in San Francisco, which is the field headquarters.
Field headquarters.
Along with the museum chief, who's in Berkeley, and the engineering chief, who's also in San Francisco.
Well, Vint was an architect.
Vint was an architect. So he tours Southwestern Monuments with Pinkley in 1928. He's appalled at the makeshift museums that he finds, which are just sort of like collections exhibited sometimes in ruins, other times just in some really rough buildings that custodians would have built themselves. And so with his report sitting on the shelf, it justifies a lot more spending and development. Higher appropriations, more staff positions. Pinkley's able to hire for fiscal year 31 park naturalist, Bob Rose. And then in 1930, Pinkley goes to Washington and he participates in the hearing. And the transcript is great, and it goes a long way. Crampton, I think, gives him an extra $100,000 to build all sorts of things in the 1932 fiscal year. Administration buildings and museums at Petrified Forest and Casa Grande, the roof over Casa Grande, which still exists, housing at monuments. It was hard to hire full-time custodians because you had to build housing for them. They're out in the middle of the desert in like remote corners of the Southwest. So you had to provide housing, you had to provide groundwater wells, you had to give them a pickup truck. So it was expensive to hire folks, but they started getting money finally around 1930 for that. Moving along. Oh, here's a makeshift museum. Where is this, Linnea?
Aztec ruins.
Aztec ruins, thanks. So they actually displayed artifacts in the excavated Puebloan ruins of Aztec ruins, which, by all accounts, people loved it. They sort of had
Mhm.
this like these lanterns set up, and it was kind of a dimly lit and kind of memorable for everyone who saw it. And then after they start getting money, you start finding modern museums in fiscal year 1932 at Casa Grande above and below the museum building at Petrified Forest. Um, Also, chapter six, we start to sadly Edna Pinkley passes away in 1929, but she sort of becomes sort of a model custodian wife who is working alongside her husband Frank Pinkley for many years. And you start to see the same pattern repeat itself at other monuments as full-time custodians are hired in the late 20s and early 30s. So a couple things to look at here in terms of the honorary custodians without pay, which are the wives.
I can step in here.
Okay.
So the in 1932, the wives who have been working actively as co-custodians for many years, many of them writing monthly reports even when their husbands were unavailable, now have a title. And we trace the establishment of the title really back to Bandelier National Monument. It was the brainchild of the wife of custodian Ed Rogers. This is on the left, you'll see a photo that we secured of Gay Cook Rogers. And we received this image, I should say, from this is courtesy of her granddaughter. And this is actually a little bit later, probably this is 1934, I believe, when she actually becomes a hired ranger at Aztec Ruins. But previously to that, in 1932, she and her husband, Ed Rogers, work as the custodians at Bandelier for a summer period. It's like a 6-month May to October period every year. And the first summer there, her father-in-law gets sick. She has to actually take over the custodianship for 2 months. And during that period, she makes a huge splash. Everyone loves the monthly reports she sends in. She creates a visitor register by just putting pieces of paper together and doing a rubber band, and then joking to the Washington office that, they thought they needed so much money for a visitor register, and she was able to just throw it together. And anyway, in her report, she refers to herself as the honorary custodian without pay, and then especially using the acronym HCWP in a fun way, but it's taken up immediately by everyone, including Albright, who visited the Southwest again that summer, saw the team spirit and the role of the wives in person, and then took that information back to Congress and praised the wives of the Southwestern National Monuments custodians to Congress using this new moniker, honorary custodian without pay, which is how Southwestern National Monuments refers to the co-custodian women from in the 1930s through even the 50s. Yeah, so that was kind of an exciting find to find the photo of also the person whose idea it was for this title.
I guess I should add, speaking of Albright, who was a real cheerleader of Southwestern Monuments and the honorary custodians without pay, but money started arriving at the Southwestern Monuments when Albright succeeded Mather as director. I don't think it's a complete coincidence. Albright was probably more interested in historic and archaeological sites, what we now call cultural resources, more than Mather, who was probably more interested in uh, outstanding scenery. Moving along with chapter six, Bob Rose is the first naturalist for SWNM. He develops all these ideas in his first year, scale models of monument features, life-size figures developed and placed in museums, restoration of excavated ancestral Puebloan buildings, Stabilization of excavated features at Chaco Canyon and elsewhere. So as southwestern archaeological sites are excavated, that is sort of made visible by digging, they're exposed to weather and oxygen for the first time. And so you start to see that 800-year-old mortar starts disintegrating quickly. So stabilization becomes a major concern in the around 1930 as Chaco Canyon, most of all, is excavated. Commitment to personal guided service. So Pinkley always insisted that people be guided around national monuments and then guided through museums and have a ranger on hand to perform that service. And then publication comparable to Nature Notes, which was a park publication. Pinkley and Rose decided that they wanted to produce the Epitaph, which was Southwestern Monument's response to Nature Notes. And that sort of didn't go well. The Park Service, the Washington office thought it was too informal, and they viewed Nature Notes as a scholarly publication. There was some tension during this period between Pinkley's sort of lighthearted, kind of fun administration of monuments and the serious business of administering the national parks during the early 1930s. Um, and these things that Rose imagined, it's kind of interesting to see them actually become real in the 1930s, such as the Kiva at Aztec ruins, a restoration of an excavated ancestral Puebloan building. So the epitaph on the left, it was sort of a fun publication that led to tension with the Washington office, and then the epitaph got shut down. But it sort of what we found is that it became kind of the basis for a much larger Southwestern Monuments monthly report, which included all the monthly reports from the individual monuments and grew to about 100 pages every month with all kinds of scientific discussions of ruins and personnel news, and then, of course, reports from all the individual monuments. Um, Moving along, I know we're running short on time, but do you want to handle 7?
Well, how are we on time? Should we do we need to start with the Q&A or are we, Megan? Let's see. Well, you go ahead and do 7.
We can get through it.
Yeah.
Chapter 7. So, like the rest of the National Park Service, a ton of money becomes available during the New Deal. The CCC is the key agency. They're sending unemployed young men out to work, especially during winter months. And where better to go during the winter months than the desert Southwest, where it's nice and warm and there's a lot of work to be done on these monuments. So the CCC, the ECW, the CWA, the PWA, they're all building things and making improvements at Southwestern monuments. It causes a ton of administrative heartburn because there's a lot of money and a lot of work all at once. And so we find Southwestern monuments staffing up during the mid 1930s. A lot of new positions are created. They are headquartered at the new museum administration building at Casa Grande Ruins. And there's a ton of this is when the monuments begin to become built up and improved to standards set by national parks. So on the left is the hotel being built at Bandelier by CCC crews, and on the right is the museum and administration building at Chiricahua National Monument in southeastern Arizona, also built by the CCC. The monthly report becomes enormous. You've got the Great Seal that we showed at the beginning. You've got Pinkley's editorials called Ruminations, which have sort of a long legacy into the 1950s. A document called The Broadcasting, which becomes like sort of personnel news and gossip for Southwestern Monuments. It's an internal document only. Part of the CCC was the development of Western Museum Laboratories at Berkeley. So the old museum headquarters for the agency becomes this big workshop where CCC enrollees are producing all kinds of interesting materials for museums in the National Park Service, including the new museums at Southwestern Monuments. And then the CCC Indian program is includes the Mobile Ruin Stabilization Unit. So Binkley, with the help of who was his naturalist that helped set up
Charlie Steen.
Charlie Steen, thank you. Set up this mobile unit that would go from monument to monument. Most of their work was at Chaco Canyon. It was a Navajo group of 10 to 15 experts
Masonry.
in masonry, and they used cement, but also some traditional techniques to shore up Chaco Canyon, Aztec ruins, Tonto. So they moved around the Southwest and really are responsible for those monuments and, in Chaco's case, National Park, surviving. Some photos of the Western Museum laboratories developing a model. This is one of Bob Rose's ideas to create these scale models for people to look at in museums. This is Tumacacori being produced in Berkeley. And then on the right, we've got some of the work done by the CCC Navajo Mobile Unit, before and after pictures of some of the work they did to shore up the structural integrity of many ancestral Puebloan archaeological sites.
All right, moving along, I'll try and go through this real quick. So we've got in chapter 8 really is the focus here for chapter 8, I'll just abbreviate this, is really the establishment of a couple things that professionalize Southwestern National Monuments as a field office. There's the establishment of a nonprofit cooperative association called Southwestern Monuments Association, which was the brainchild of Dale King, who was the naturalist. And it provided money through subscriptions and donations to print and publish educational booklets and interpretive pamphlets for example, the self-guiding trails that were established at monuments in the late 1930s and through the 1940s. But most importantly, this was the kind of pinnacle period for Frank Pinkley. Finally, he could move away from the circulars and the monthly reports being his way of providing instruction to custodians, to now having an official custodian school of instruction with approval from the Washington office held at headquarters. The inaugural school occurred in February of 1940 and sadly was marked by a fatal heart attack that Pinkley had during his opening address. And he passed away at the very start of the school. But importantly, he had built up a team that could just take it from there. And they ran the school without him. And the transcripts of the various sessions were published in the monthly report the next month for March. They're all there, mainly sessions held by his headquarters staff.
And then the school the following year, without Pinkley, Hugh Miller was the superintendent. And they held another school. This one included the wives had their own meeting, which you can see in the lower left, which I guess more firmly established the honorary custodians without pay concept. They developed their own newsletter and began, I guess, more formalizing the work that they did along with their spouses who were custodians.
And the image on the left is from the 1940 school, and the images on the right from 1941.
So with the beginning of World War II, resources in the agency were scarce, and it occasioned, I guess, the closure of Southwestern Monuments as was built up by Pinkley and his staff, subsumed within the regional office at Santa Fe, which had only, I think, 3 employees. And then suddenly, when they inherited all of SW&M's employees, they had, I don't know, 15 to 20 people. Wartime administration operated at a minimum basis. I think this is true for most of the agency. And no SW&M at this time period. It's all Region 3. Not a whole lot of work done on stabilization. As you can imagine, all the CCC folks, many of them went to war.
The CC was ended in 1942 as well.
And then new superintendent, Southwestern National Monuments resurrected after the war in 1950 in Santa Fe with a new superintendent. The agency buys Gila Pueblo, which was a large um, archaeological center in Globe, built by Gladwin. Is that right?
Harold Gladwin.
Harold Gladwin. And it had all of the facilities of a preservation laboratory for Southwestern artifacts. So the NPS buys that facility, moves the reestablished Southwestern National Monuments office there, and that lasts for about 5 years. And some photos of those final years of the resurrected. Some of the same staff members early in their career in the 30s started working at Casa Grande Ruins, went to Region 3, and then worked for the reconstituted SW&M during the
You got
1950s.
Louis Castellum and Dale King, and then the superintendent was John Davis. You can see him squatting in the front, middle, in that picture on the right.
So some of the original, 1930s clerks and naturalists remained with the new SW&M in the 1950s. And there's Gila Pueblo, some views on the left. So in conclusion, we dedicated our conclusion mostly to sort of discussing sort of institutional legacies of Southwestern monuments. Major one, of course, is the Branch Preservation Laboratory at Gila Pueblo. Technically, it was not part of SW&M. It was administered under the NPS Museum Division. It was sort of the Western counterpart to the Preservation Laboratory at Jamestown back east. But it was shared the same facility with SW&M, and the two staffs worked hand in hand. After the closure of Southwestern National Monuments in 1957, the agency began to pretty quickly realize that it wasn't a bad idea to have a sort of administrative unit to collectively bring together groups of national monuments in the Southwest that are very small and very remote, and to manage them from a central office. And so we start to see sort of smaller variations of SW&M appearing, including the Canyonlands Complex, which is the forerunner of Southeast Utah Group, which still exists, if I have that correct. The Navajo Lands Group in Chinle, the Flagstaff Group, the Southern Utah Group, which was mostly a national park group, but did include, help me out, the no, the Mormon Fort.
Pipe Spring.
Pipe Spring, thank you. And then the Southern Arizona Group, which still survives and is now based in Phoenix. So with that, we're at 59 minutes.
We do have just a couple
might
questions
open this
in the
up for
chat.
a little bit of Q&A.
Maybe we can go quickly. We'll start with one that seems like a pretty quick answer. Gwen asks, were you able to determine if WPA and NAVA custodian Jimmy Brewer went to college to go get a degree in anthropology like Davy Jones, Porky Jones, and Sally Brewer? I wasn't able to figure this out in my research. He seemed to just show up in northern Arizona.
No, we were not able to establish that. Looked everywhere. He just shows up as a museum associate with the Museum of Northern Arizona, working with